So, Berto, let's take a break from talking incessantly about Baldur's Gate 3.
Let's do it.
Instead of playing it, of course. Let's actually podcast, and let's start chapter 12 in the Duggar deep dive. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast, as it says on his shirt, available on the merch site, which should be in the link below.
What am I, a prop to you?
And my name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and I use my friends as props. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda. And you know spring water?
Yeah.
I make the little springs. I manufacture little springs.
Actually, that's a funny joke. Okay, so where we last left off, we were talking about the beliefs of IBLP. And I had compiled in my notes different categories of beliefs as far as I could tell. And not only what I could gather from what they said in the documentary and podcasts and other written materials, but also their own materials I read. And in the last episode, we talked about gender and authority. That's a big part of it. We talked about that in detail. I talked about how bigotry is a big part of the belief system, that queer people are evil or they're sinning or they're against God or something. Procreation and the quiverful whole belief system.
Right.
I know that this isn't official, but it seems as though they operate as if they are the chosen ones. They are the special group of people in God's eyes, even in relation to other Christians, and particularly in relation to non-Christians, right? So they seem to operate that way. Also, we talked about dating and courtship and marriage, and we also talked about sexuality and how basically it's sexist and controlling and everything. And within this category, this belief category of IBLP, we left off with Mike Pence.
Right. We were about to talk about Mike.
Right. So,
whom I was, by the way, when you asked me the question, I was thinking Mike Huckabee.
Right. So, Mike Pence follows rules that are seemingly similar to IBLP. I don't know if he was a part of it or he was a part of a church that just had a very similar point of view, because this belief isn't only within IBLP. What have you heard about Mike Pence?
I mean, I do remember the thing where he doesn't want to be alone with women that are not his wife. Right. So I remember that was a thing, which could create problems if you work with women and you have to have a meeting. It's like, well, we can't have a closed door meeting, just the two of us.
Right, exactly. So the belief is, and he's talked about this openly, this isn't just reading into things, and this is a belief within IBLP, of course, that a man should not have a one-on-one meeting with a woman who is not their wife. Also, he believes that, I don't know if it's a belief, but a practice or a way of living, that he calls his wife mother.
Oh, right. I remember this.
I mean, this is kind of a side
note.
But what do you think about that?
Well, okay. So on the one hand, I have taken to calling my wife mama. But it's because when I have two little kids, so oftentimes I'll be saying well, go check with mama, or and so eventually I start going mama, that kind of thing. And then pretty soon I noticed I'm just oh, mama, but not when the two of us are alone. It's more in the household.
Yeah.
I certainly don't go, mother. I can't imagine mother, would you like to get frisky tonight? It's just not right.
Yeah. Well, I think that the discourse around this of liberals making fun of Mike Pence regarding this, I thought was unfair for that reason, because we don't know how he refers to her in those kinds of contexts. But even if he did, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, do you know how many songs refer to baby and mama? I mean, it's it's never, love songs never say wife or girlfriend, or rarely. It's always baby and mama. I mean, if you really...
Come here, baby.
Come here, mama, sexy mama.
Sexy mama.
These kinds of words, if you just take a half second to think about what you're actually saying, it's weird. So,
there's that romantic song, Mother!
Yeah. So the fact that he calls his wife mother shouldn't be, I think it's the fact that it's mother, though.
And it's mother, and it just gets compounded with all the other oddities.
Right. And absolutely, a lot of families will not only call each other mama and papa, or mother and father, but when you become a grandparent, you'll probably call
Nana,
your
grandpa.
wife grandma. And
That's true.
if you're always around kids, you could see it just replacing what you call each other. So I didn't really consider that to be, but the fact that he cannot have a one-on-one meeting with a woman who is not his wife is utterly ridiculous. So let's get into it. I looked into the history of this and some of the details with Mike Pence specifically. So it's not necessarily a hard and fast rule, but it is heavily frowned upon. And there are a lot of men and really around the world. This isn't something that's just Christians in the United States. I mean, you could probably find, in fact, I would guess most men around the world, most societies around the world adhere to this rule, right? Because a lot of societies have a lot of sexism and also a lot of delegation of different tasks to different men and women.
And yet somehow women keep ending up alone with men who abuse them.
Right. So
that's odd.
Yeah. So generally speaking, it's frowned upon for a man to not only have one-on-one contact with a woman, but also to attend social events with a woman or to have meals alone with a woman, even if other people are around. So if a man and woman were to go to a restaurant and there were other people around, that's also considered not okay. In Mike Pence's autobiography, so this is his own account, he talks about how Hillary Clinton, another politician, wanted to have a private conversation with him about the running of the United States, right? He refused because of following this rule. She's not asking to have dinner in her hotel room.
Right.
She's asking to go to, Olive Garden or something. And he's like, no. Because I need to follow my rule. Now, if you're a plumber, maybe, but if you're a politician for the secular government of the United fucking States, and
can't you have a chaperone at least?
But in his autobiography, he said that she persuaded him to have dinner in an overly crowded restaurant.
Oh, okay.
She's like, well, what if we go to a restaurant with a lot of people where there would be a lot of eyes on us to make sure. So imagine if I lived this way. I thought about this. I thought it took me a while to get to this point. But then I was like, because, you think Mike Pence and all these other people, like, I wonder what. But then I was like, well, even for me, I'm not a politician that has to run the country and have lots of meetings with lots of people. I'm usually just sitting here in this chair. And if anyone, I'm talking to you and my wife, right? If I followed this rule, Berto, I could not have female clients.
No, of course not. You literally cannot.
I couldn't have female supervisees.
Right.
I couldn't talk with most of my students privately because most students in my program are women. I couldn't have friends who are women, like Lita, for example. One of the original co-hosts of Psychology in Seattle 15 years ago, by the way. By the way, promo for the 15th, which I think is tomorrow when this episode comes out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday, will be our 15th anniversary anyway.
Whoa.
And we're going to be broadcasting for 15 hours on YouTube. Join us there if you want. I couldn't have a friend. I couldn't podcast with Rebecca.
Nope. Well, wait, does it count can't the Holy Ghost be listening through the audio devices or something?
If you can't go to a restaurant with other people around. The other thing I was thinking of, well, what if an Uber driver picks me up or a Lyft driver and it's a woman? That's probably
you're in a car by yourself. No.
Yeah.
Wow, that's extremely limiting.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're at home, let's say a worker or like a maintenance worker or a housekeeper or something. Nope. You can't be home while that's happening.
And it's interesting because when I watch reality TV, like 90 Day Fiancé, there are men from all over the world who it's clear they have much more traditional gender values and rules and understandings. And there will be occasional moments where the American white woman will, I vaguely remember a situation where you had an Egyptian man, I believe, very traditional Muslim Egyptian fellow who came to the United States, and he's with his fiancée in New Mexico, Albuquerque, I believe. And while he was gone, she, who is, by the way, like 50 years old, she let in like a plumber to work on her house. And she's been a single mom for a long time.
Right.
And existed, on her own for a long time. Not that that should matter, but just to give some background. And she hired a plumber to, and by the way, this Egyptian guy is, I think is in his 20s or something. It's just another kind of factor. And when the Egyptian guy gets, home to their house, he's just, yelling at her and freaking out about the fact that she let in this male plumber. And when I'm watching this, I'm just thinking, well, what did you think happened? Like, you watch too many porn movies with plumbers,
Yeah.
But he was adamant, right? And so, I think there are a lot of people who operate this way, which is just, I don't know. So a lot of today is going to be talking about the rules of IBLP and I guess evangelical Christians and maybe fundamentalists or traditional gender cultures around the world. And I don't want it to come across like we're just here to ridicule a different set of values or beliefs. You can believe whatever you want to believe. You can believe that there's a magical spaghetti monster floating in the sky. You can believe in reincarnation. You can believe in astrology. You can believe in Jesus. You can believe in whatever you want to. But there's a line between having your beliefs and harming other people and oppressing other people. And that's where I draw the line, and then I will ridicule. If you want to believe that men and women are different according to God, but your beliefs don't impact other people negatively and don't impact society negatively, don't impact your children negatively, don't limit people, don't oppress people, then, like if Mike Pence wanted to say, I really, because of my beliefs, I'm going to try to avoid being alone with women because I think that's what God wants me to do. But when I'm at work for a secular government and I need to have a meeting with a woman, then, I'll put that aside because I have a responsibility as an elected official to do my job.
Otherwise, just get out of the business.
Right.
You don't have to be in office.
Right. For a country that explicitly says that there's a separation between church and state.
Dude, that's what we should do. If we pass laws where it's like, if you cannot meet with a female representative, you cannot be in office, we might eliminate.
Yeah. Well, there should be a lot of boxes that should be checked. Do you recognize the scientific consensus that climate change is largely a result of humans polluting the atmosphere with greenhouse gases? Yes or no? That's just a preference. Okay. So did you know that this rule has been around for 70 plus years, Berto? Like officially?
The rule that he follows?
Yeah.
Wow.
So this rule apparently is called the Billy Graham rule. And now people are calling it the Pence rule because he popularized it. But it's from 1948.
Okay.
And Billy Graham, the charismatic Christian preacher, apparently popularized this rule. And what is the stated purpose of this rule, Berto?
I imagine it is to prevent temptation for adultery and prevent marriages from getting ruined.
Yeah, exactly. So its number one purpose is to avoid temptation, which I just... okay, so it's not just women you're attracted to, which would still be awful and oppressive.
Right.
It's literally any woman.
Anyone. Because men, it really makes this statement. It's basically a cynical statement about humanity, right? Now, what's interesting about it is I could imagine a different approach to this, which is imagine a recognition that, hey, a lot of women are being abused by men, let's say, right? And obviously a lot of that happens when they're alone. So as a rule in our religion, we're going to make it so that you as a man have a responsibility to, if there's a strange woman in a aisle or in a alleyway or something, don't invade their space, stay away, stuff like this, right? Or other rules like, hey, listen, if you're married, don't don't go and have a private meeting in someone's hotel room or like have extra drinks and whatever, right? But no, it's like this blanket thing. Like you can never be alone with a woman.
Right. That's interesting. The way that you framed it was, the first one was empathy for women who might be made to feel uncomfortable.
Right.
Because presumably you're saying, well, I'm not going to harm this woman, but she doesn't know that. So I don't want to make her afraid, you know? Like I've talked about this before, but when I'm downtown Seattle and I'm walking on the sidewalk and somehow I end up behind a woman, I will either try to, you know, and there's no one else. We're kind of like, we're not in a busy area.
Right.
It's just like on the block, it might literally be just me and her. And especially if it's later at night, I will hang back and give her half a block, right? Because in my head, I'm like, undoubtedly, she's noted the fact that there's a single man in pace with her behind her. Like, of course she has registered that.
Right.
I don't know if she's afraid of it, but let's just...
So you just get...
Yeah.
See, whereas
or the other thing I do is I will race in front of her.
Right.
If I'm close to her, you know, I'll just kind of pick up the pace so that she's behind me.
Right.
And I'll try to get out in front of her a ways. I probably do that if I'm worried that I'm going to be late somewhere or something.
My approach is usually to say, "Hey, mother, how's it going? Did you just fall from the mother store?"
So
it works like a charm.
Yeah. So the first purpose of the Billy Graham or Pence rule is to avoid sexual temptation, which is just ridiculous. And I'm just thinking, are you that? But of course, if you deprive your members of any kind of sexual expression or...
And you make it all about sex at all times.
And you're constantly talking about sex, then you have this horny, repressed group of people that actually might be kind of a problem.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Like, don't be in a room alone. Why? Well, because you'll get tempted by anyone at all times.
Yeah. Don't have sex for fun. Don't masturbate.
Don't think about it either.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about it.
Yeah. The other purpose is to avoid accusations of sexual harassment.
Right. Again, so
just to be clear, this is explicit. So Billy Graham says in this rule, that's one of the stated purposes. Right. It's not just like we imagine that's why they went.
So again, instead of like an empathetic, like, hey, we've been noticing a lot of sexual harassment. So guys, we need to step up. We need some rules here. No, it's like, hey, you know you're going to get accused unfairly. So just so that you don't.
Yeah. And I could see someone like Billy Graham going all the way back to 1948, which is kind of surprising because you'd think back then they wouldn't care about those kinds of things because it was so imbalanced regarding the power, and you would have press that would look the other way. I mean, like as famously the press knew about John F. Kennedy's improprieties and refrained from publishing it while he was president, while he was alive, because they thought it was impolite or that if they did publish it, it's just being salacious. And I'm guessing as journalists would worry that they would be attacked by the public saying like, okay, that's interesting, but you shouldn't be publishing people's private lives. Can you imagine such a time, Berto?
Well, and it makes you wonder if in 1948 they had to list this as one of the rules, how bad it must have been that women were getting harassed all the time. Right. And then again, instead of like the empathy of like, wow, we got to do something about this. Like, okay, so you don't get accused falsely, because we all know we get accused falsely. I just got accused last week. Right. It's just funny to hear that Billy Graham's just like, well, I want to avoid. But I mean, the good news though is that it did work, because Bill Gothard was never alone with a woman, right? Yeah. So the third stated purpose is to display one's integrity. So I'm guessing leading by example or something, which, it's not. Well, just for Mike Pence not to meet alone in a restaurant with other people alone, to not meet with Hillary Clinton to talk about politician things like running the country. Displays integrity. That doesn't display your integrity. That displays how backward and idiotic you are. So let's just play it out. I actually like this philosophy. It's growing on me. But I wouldn't stop at one sin, because that's just adultery. What about murder? I can't be alone with a person because I might murder them, right? Homosexuality, like, dude, you and I are alone together. I'm sorry, but I'm getting kind of vibes. Who knows what could happen? That's not okay. We can't be alone together. Anything, theft. I can't be trusted to be left alone with an iPhone that's not mine. You could just take this to the nth degree.
Right, yeah.
Why stop at adultery?
Why is it just as... The other thing that I just thought of was, imagine if women politicians had the reverse rule, that they never meet alone with men.
Right.
Imagine male politicians. Imagine what would happen in our society if Kamala Harris had this rule that she doesn't meet with men alone because she doesn't want to be accused of sexual harassment.
I'm sure that would go over well, by the way. Same folks, the folks that are making these rules, they react well when a woman wears a hijab, right? Like a full body covering. They react really well to that modesty. Right. To that
religious fundamentalism.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, because there's a fair amount of you that are in the United States, Mike Pence was vice president under Donald Trump. So I looked up a poll of Americans in the New York Times regarding something along these lines, because I was like, I wonder how many people in United, because to you and I, it's like, what? But then I was thinking, I wonder, I could see how this would be one of those things where
it's more popular than you think.
A lot more Americans adhere to. The only thing I could find was a poll that asked if people believed this statement, and then they broke it out by men and women. It's always the binary, by the way, in these kinds of polls. And so they asked people, do you agree that it would be appropriate to have dinner alone with someone of the opposite sex who was not their spouse? So again, dinner alone, I'm pretty sure the question would have been at a restaurant, not like in a hotel room. So what percentage of men and women said that it would be appropriate, meaning it'd be okay, you and me, you and I would say, yes, it is absolutely appropriate to have dinner alone with someone of the opposite sex who is not your spouse, because it depends on the context.
I hope it's like 85%.
But it's not. But anyway, what percentage of men? Let's start with that.
Okay, percentage of men. 85%.
43.
No, come on. I was expecting you to say like 65, and I was going to be horrified.
Women.
50%.
Less, 35.
Even less.
Why do you think fewer women would say it's appropriate?
I mean, maybe, I don't know. I guess the guys might be like, well, they don't want to close that door to themselves. I don't know. But like...
Or women are more worried about bad things happening.
No romantic indication here. It was just having dinner with...
I mean, when you read the phrase, it has that overtone, but if you really look at it, of course...
Wait, did it say when you're in a relationship?
It doesn't even say if you're in a relationship. It doesn't even say that. But I think it's implied that you have a spouse. But anyway, so let's assume that people figured you have a spouse, and it would be appropriate to have dinner alone with someone of the opposite sex. It doesn't say be alone in a room. It says dinner, which I think implies restaurant, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have dinner. I mean, I suppose...
I could see how people saying, oh, dinner alone. Well, what are we doing here?
Yeah. So, yeah. But even so, Rebecca... Lita,
right.
Tons of women who are, and it doesn't even say about like sister or cousin
right.
or your daughter. It just says who is not your spouse.
So you can't even have breakfast together alone the next morning? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah. So, yeah. Again, you can believe what you want to believe. I will absolutely defend anyone who wants to believe in whatever they want to believe in. It is truly American to have the freedom of religion and the freedom of your own belief system. The freedom to not have a religion, right? To be an atheist, for example. The freedom to believe in a random belief system that doesn't adhere to any religion. Of course, everyone has the freedom to believe, but there's a threshold beyond that of which, if you're harming people like this, absolutely does harm people and certainly doesn't fix the problem. If you're trying to fix sexual harassment, if you're trying to fix temptation, if you're trying to fix infidelity, there are other ways than just separate, like Jim Crow laws, right? It's like, well, let's just segregate society so that we don't have to actually face the actual problem, you know what I mean? And in effect, keep women out of the conversations of power such that they're never able to do anything about the oppression anyway and the harm that they're experiencing anyway. Okay. Another part of the sexuality and gender belief system, because that's that's where we are in the outline here, is that it is against the rule to front hug. You're not supposed to front hug. And I think particularly people of the opposite sex in their wording.
Sure.
So you're not supposed to hug, even if you're dating someone, until you're married. So
even if you're dating.
Yeah.
No front hugs. Oh yeah, I guess I did hear that in the the documentary. It's like side hug.
Right, side hug.
But side hug to someone you're courting for marriage.
Well,
I don't think you can side hug a woman. Not in the IBLP.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. You can't even like hold hands or like forget it.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think outside of IBLP, it might be okay to side hug people.
Sure.
Like for a pastor to side hug like a woman that's a parishioner, you know what I mean?
In Colombia, the tradition, I don't know if I'm pretty sure it's still like this. You do kiss on the cheeks, let alone a hug, you know?
Yeah, this doesn't really apply to the non-American cultures that are not as phobic about touching in general as we are. So, yeah. So there was a famous viral video that I think came out 10, 15 years ago have you seen it about Christian side hug? Okay.
It sounds familiar.
I'm sure you would have seen it.
Okay, I probably did see it.
So let me paint a picture for you. It's, it's a stage and an audience, and it seems to be like a Christian IBLP or evangelical fundamentalist Christian get together. And there are kids on young men on stage, and they're dressed like the way young, out of touch white dudes would think rappers might dress like. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
And they perform, and there's like six. There's like, I think there's a few bandanas in there somewhere, and there's like six of these young men, and God bless them. They probably had been brainwashed.
This is sounding more and more familiar.
Yeah, and then the crowd is into it. Okay, and the song, I'll say, especially for its time,
it's catchy.
It's definitely catchy, but it's
can't front hug, got a side hug, hun.
Yeah, and the hip hopness of the song, particularly for its time, and given the context, I've seen worse. Let's just put it that way. Of the church generated performances that were in the rap direction, this isn't one of the worst, but it's pretty bad, particularly today when you hear it, because the sort of hip hop conventions that they're following.
Because from the front hug, you might feel a bump, and then there's one in the bun.
Oh my God, that's good. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of try to not perform it, but I'm gonna try to. I didn't memorize the flow, but I do know some of it. So the chorus is, "Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ. I'm a rough rider.
I'm a rough rider."
What are you talking about? I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ. It's sort of like
a raw rider.
It sort of has It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia kind of thing,
Like I could see Charlie doing this.
Yeah, I was like, I just want him to go in the boy's hole.
Mac would do this song, yes.
Right.
In the seasons when he was still clueless.
Right. Stop and listen. No front hugs and no kissing. I ain't that scared to call you mama. You'll be riding home in a coma. I ain't that scared to call you I ain't that scared to call your mama.
Okay, got it.
You'll be riding home in a coma?
Yeah. So because your mama's gonna beat you till you're in a coma.
No, I think it's, if you hug me straight, I will put you in a coma.
No, I'm not afraid of calling your mama. And if I call your mama, she's gonna put you in a coma.
Oh, but riding home from anyway.
Yeah.
But a coma, and coma doesn't rhyme with mama.
Yeah.
Don't use that front hug, boy. That makes us awkward. That's inappropriate. You back up off her, because we want to keep your mind pure, want to keep away from sin. That means it's you too, girl, only one arm around him. Give me that Christian side hug.
Give me that Christian side hug.
Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug. That Christian side hug. I'm going global because you don't know me. I'm buying babies like Angelina Jolie. So
buying babies?
The crowd goes nuts when they hear this.
Buying babies?
Yeah. I think maybe in the...
For adrenochrome? I don't understand.
Well, I think in the tabloids, it was when Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt were...
I get it.
Adopting a lot of kids.
Makes sense. Why is he buying them?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So
like, I get the reference.
I'm going global because you don't know... Well... Oh, maybe like they're spreading the word of God. This is the most charitable I can think of.
Okay.
Is because he starts out, I'm going global.
Yeah.
Because you don't know me, huh?
Well, I'm not going global because I want to expand.
Jolie, huh?
I'm not going global because I want to expand. I'm going global because you don't know me.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna buy some babies.
Oh, so quit that hugging. And slow down, mama, and hit my fists like President Obama.
Woo!
So was President Obama known for fist bumping?
Fist bumper, yeah.
And
hey, at least they gave some love to the president, right?
Yeah, I imagine that today they wouldn't necessarily have that, but I could go on. But
there's a
you can look it up on YouTube. It is it's quite a thing.
I definitely had seen this once you started rapping. I was like, it brought back wonderful memories.
Because you don't know me. I'm buying babies like Angelina Jolie. And the crowd goes crazy. I'm like, what,
Yeah.
what's the maybe it's an inside joke.
It
Who
could
knows?
be.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a thing about buying babies in that church.
Don't use that front hug, boy. That makes us awkward.
That makes
That's
us awkward.
inappropriate. You back up off her. So I'm guessing that my version of it is cringeworthy in a whole new way. You know what I mean? So sometimes I wonder, because there's someone on YouTube will pull clips from my videos and put them together to make a funny compilation. And
this is perfect.
You got to figure that what I just did, a snippet will show up. Okay, so we talked about Mike Pence. We talked about side hugs and no front hugging. And there's a whole culture around this. Lots of talk about it. It's not just briefly because they really got to get into it with their followers,
right?
Because there's a lot of situations that have to be adjudicated and discussed. And
again, just constant obsession.
Yeah. But let's just follow this through the implication. Okay, what do you think they actually think will happen if you front hugged?
I can understand where they're coming from, as in, I certainly don't agree, but I can see their chain of logic. It goes something like this. Yes, of course, a single hug isn't the end of the world. What happens though is when you have a front hug, you have a lot of surface area contact. You're also looking at each other. Your faces get very close. All that naturally gets these thoughts into the guy's head, and maybe the girl's head too, and it reminds them of sex and sexuality. And it puts the devil starts whispering things. Not to mention, God forbid, if the man gets too excited, now we've got a whole other level of awkwardness. And if that happens, that might lead them straight to the bedroom.
Yeah.
Because when you feel a bump, you got to go put one in the bun.
Yeah.
So
as the song goes,
in the bun, in the hun, I forgot what the thing was. But the point is, like, I could see their line of thinking that these are all little steps leading you down the wrong pathway.
Yeah, it's just
yeah.
But to me, to reduce humans to that causality, right? That if you hug a girl when you're a guy at school, independent of your own sexual orientation, by the way. I mean, who knows?
Right.
They're not even talking. So can two guys?
But that's what I'm saying. Like, why do we stop there?
Yeah.
In fact, aren't we more concerned about the homosexual side of the fence?
Right.
Like, what's going? And honestly,
but they probably say, well, of course, guys don't hug straight on because
you shouldn't be homosexual
because they're dudes. Of course, that doesn't happen.
The really sad part about this is it's not like they haven't. They are identifying real issues in the world. Yes, there are complications between people's relationships to each other and sexuality. It's very complicated. They're identifying that there are issues, but the solution is the abstinence solution. It's the one size fits all abstinence solution, right?
Right.
And And it's basically not a human approach. It's not an animal, humanistic, real approach. It's
Right.
a hopeful, naive, like, hey, just don't do it.
Right.
I have problems drinking alcohol. Just stop.
Right.
I smoke. Stop.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they really wanted to curb, for example, premarital sex or teenage pregnancy or unwanted pregnancy or something,
Right.
then there are actual ways that you can help people to understand their bodies, understand their impulses, understand how to get to know themselves, other than just refraining from something and just saying no. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I also want to get into another belief that I don't know if IBLP believe this, but definitely Bill Gothard told his followers that after childbirth, and many of the former cult members have reported this, after childbirth, the mothers, the wives, they can't have sex for 40 days if it's a boy and 80 days if it's a girl. Did you hear this?
No, I did not hear that one.
Jim Bob Duggar and Michelle Duggar publicly talked about this, by the way. Why?
Okay. The latter question, I don't know yet, but I can imagine one thing. You're not supposed to be having sex other than for procreation. And it's very unlikely that the woman's going to get pregnant right after giving birth. So they're probably giving it 1 cycle's plus worth of time to see if maybe now she's fertile, and then you can start having babies again or something, I guess. Now, why it would be longer for women having... I don't know. If I had to guess, it is that it takes... No, I can't. I'm at a loss.
Well, I want to know what you're going to say.
Well, I mean, like, in my head, I'm going to a sexist place, right? Like, it's basically, giving birth to a boy is more natural, more, that's what we want, right? Giving birth to a woman, it's like, well, we got to recover from that thing.
Well, you're not far from it. Apparently, from Leviticus in the Christian Bible, baby girls are seen as more unclean.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
So you don't want your penis to be touching the uncleanliness of a girl, the residue of a girl baby. So you got to give it 80 days, bro, because in 40 days, sure, boy, if you had a baby boy,
that's cleaned out.
But
it's
there's
fine.
still some of that
my God.
unclean girl residue that you don't want.
It's so bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, that someone wrote that 5,000 years ago, whatever, that someone's today going like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 So we've been talking about, at the end of this sexuality section, we've already talked about why they're so obsessed with sex, but I just wanted to review the points that we've talked about. Because it seems so inevitable that a cult, and even particularly a Christian group, would of course be obsessed with sex because it just seems so intertwined, but it isn't necessarily. If you actually listen to historians talking about Western history and Christian history, which is very much intertwined, the obsession with sexual repression and shame isn't a given. You just imagine, well, of course it's always been around and it must have been really bad 1,000 years ago, right? And certainly there was sexual shame, but the focus on sexuality and repressing sexuality and the commentary on sexuality is particular to the last couple centuries, and maybe even the last 150 years in the United States. So it is, and maybe even more particularly in recent decades. But because, you can have a religion or even a cult without having any commentary or rules about sex. And when I say that out loud, that sounds ridiculous because they always do, right? But you don't have to. There could be, you could absolutely have a cult that just says, yeah, have your own beliefs and life about sex. Doesn't matter to us. Anyway, let's get back to controlling your lives in other ways, but they always involve sexuality, right?
Yes. Now, I will say though, I mean, what you're talking about, I guess these like sects that have these extra things, but I mean, the Leviticus has been around for time immemorial, and what was the Catholic Church if not like a completely repressive sexual?
Well, so I only remember bits and pieces from listening to lectures from historians, academic historians about sexuality within, Western, Europe history and also within the Catholic Church. And it's a lot more complicated than I remember it.
Sure.
The way I thought it would
sense.
be, because I just figured, well, of course, it must have been super repressive 1,000 years ago. But the historians were saying that it's actually
Right.
The contemporary sense of not only Puritanism but also Victorianism is particular to today.
Right. No, I'm sorry. I actually confused, because what you're talking about is really like the society at large, or large swaths of society or whatever, and how big or not those pockets and how frequent those pockets were.
Yeah, and also the application of the language in the Bible varies over time. Of course, Catholics believed in the Bible 1,000 years ago, but the things they emphasized, just think about the Spanish Inquisition. They were following the letter of the law in the Bible according to them. It can be applied. Anyway, so the reasons why high control groups, cults, and religions, which you could argue are on that spectrum somewhere, depending, are often so obsessed with sex. Not that they have just some commentary on it, but they're obsessed about sex is, we've already talked about this, but just to review, one is to control the women, and two is to control just all the cult members. You can control the women in a variety of ways, but just to name a few, is that it's an excuse to blame women for harassment and assault from men, because it's not just saying that, like the Nike thing and the eye traps. It's not saying that, well, men are monsters and you're good, but we have to adjust for how monstrous men are. It's you're to blame because we've told you that men are horn dogs and can't control themselves. And so if you dress this way, it's on you, right? Because there's, one of the worries that the power structure, the patriarchal power structure has, and always has really, at least from, my observation, is that if men are going to assault women or harm women, there has to be some way of excusing that behavior or blaming it on the women, because if we allow women to actually have agency and political power and legal power, then that would flip the roles, at least temporarily, but maybe even overall, right? If they all band together against us and say that we as men are to blame for harassment and assaults, then where does the power given to women end, if they have that power? So we have to have an elaborate system that, because we understand that harassment and assaults are going to happen, but, and maybe even some of the power structure wants it to be that way, depending, but probably mostly not. But we have to establish that they are to blame and men are not to blame, right?
So, I mean, I feel like it's a little different, in my opinion, in that they as in folks that establish these hierarchies and these power structures and make up the rules, I really do believe they initially buy their own soap. As in, they are actually setting these rules down on paper because they're like, well, listen, as males, as an example, we can't have our women cheating on us. So we can't allow guys being alone with women unless they're husbands and wives. Okay, number one. Number two, we're horny, so we don't want to be tempted. And, we do believe that sex is bad, so we don't want to be tempted. Now, in practice, once they get power, they end up breaking all the laws and abusing women anyways. And when there are abuses, they end up turning a blind eye and saying, well, no, it was your fault. All that is still all true. I just believe that the inception of it is on paper grounded in still not the healthy things. But I don't think they sit there going, how can we abuse women systematically and get away with it, even though that is sort of what ends up happening.
yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Their conscious mind, but the unconscious or subtle mind is like uncomfortable with the notion that women could have power over any man, even if it's some guy that I don't know. Right. I feel personally threatened, or it threatens the structure. Anyway, another reason to be obsessed with sex in the effort of trying to control women is to keep women away from power. For example, I can't talk to you alone, so therefore, so even if you on paper say like women can be hired in all jobs, but they can't meet alone with a colleague, a male colleague, then that absolutely would. I mean, I'm guessing if we had a law that was on the books, in the United States, that of this, I'm guessing that women couldn't really do any work outside.
Oh no, I'm sure men would move out of the way to make room for.
Yeah. Another is to not let women have any agency, including sexuality, right? Because the idea is like, we've told you when you can have sex, we've told you that you need to suppress sex, because in general, we don't want any of our members having power, but we particularly don't want women having any kind of agency. And so if we discuss sexuality in a rational human way, we'd have to include that women want sex and they get horny potentially, and they might want to be with someone, right? And we don't want that notion to be out there at all, because it threatens everything, right? Not only that, what if my wife lusts after another person,
right.
Or
it's
or
like
my daughter or something.
Right. And it's like they want it both ways, because they want to at once not acknowledge, not talk about it, not think about it, but also obsess that is the case and that we're constantly at risk.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, another reason, whether it's stated or not, is to keep women pregnant and dependent on the husband. Because there's a lot of rules around, you can only have sex while you're married. You need to be pregnant all the time, the quiverful, and women is pregnant. It always kind of boggled me when I would hear depictions or even fictional depictions of an abusive husband, and how desperate he wanted his wife to be pregnant, or if a guy is a womanizer, and how much pleasure he took in saying, "Oh yeah, I got her pregnant. Let's say he's not a psychopath. A sadist. You've heard of that storyline, right? Where it's just like, I want to have as many kids as we can have, and I want to have 10 kids. Sort of, it's a masculine ideal, right? I mean, it's a masculine ideal to some extent, but it always kind of confused me, because I'm thinking, well, children are a lot of responsibility for both parents. So what exactly are you wanting here? And also, if she is pregnant with kids, she's distracted with kids, and so she probably isn't going to be very available to you. But if you have a desire to possess your wife and to keep her under wraps so that she has no power, and she's completely dependent on you for money and support and helping her out around the house, in quotes, then that might be a motivation, right?
They sort of corner themselves into, well, but we can't have sex with a whole bunch of women, so therefore I guess we got to just max out our wives. Because we have to have as many, we talked about this before, we have to have as many options for power and control as possible. And the more kids that we train in our way, the more likely we can.
Right.
So it's a weird evolution beyond just the individual's DNA. It's like the evolution of the movement, right?
Yeah. I mean, by definition, if the IBLP group lasted, and for the next 1,000 years, half the planet would be IBLP members, right, because they all have 20 kids,
Which is what a lot of them are worried about the other direction, right? It's like, oh my gosh, we're getting overrun by all these dark people, all these foreigners.
Right. So the other reason is to control cult members in general, and this line of thinking, or these bullet points, apply to a lot of different cults, like the David Koresh cult and others. And these are just my ideas, and I think other cult analysts will also agree to some extent with this. So number one is to keep members constantly vigilant internally, because if for IBLP members, you can imagine how, particularly teenagers and young adults that weren't married, right, how ashamed of themselves they would be, because undoubtedly they had sinful thoughts, right?
Yeah.
I.e., human impulses and ideas and urges, but also so you have these individuals that are just constantly distracted,
right,
and beating themselves up, and thus they need to seek redemption or the okay from the church, right? Because you're starting out as a deficit, right? Another reason is to keep people internally vigilant is they worry about being punished, right? Because they're all probably breaking the rules in their minds, but they aren't necessarily being outed for it.
Right.
So the internal vigilance would be like, don't let this out. Don't reveal this because I might be excommunicated or judged or something. And you could even see young people thinking, if I'm outed in this way, then I really won't be able to get a partner because they'll all identify me as a non-believer or a sinner or something.
Right.
And so I have to keep this under wraps so I can maybe one day be able to satisfy this need.
There's sort of this feeling of an irreversible damage to your future,
right,
if you deviate.
Especially for girls, right? That
Yeah,
you're tainted forever, which we'll get into later because some of the literature gets into that. Another is if you have this culture of constantly sex shaming, then you really focus the group members on monitoring others and condemning others, right? It's not just looking internally, but you're very focused on, hey, that's not a side hug, that kind of thing. Also, it separates the high controlled members from mainstream society, because in mainstream society, you have men and women going to dinner together or having conversations together or doing front hugs, You
can't participate in normal society.
Right. It keeps you separate because, one, you don't want to participate with those people, but even if you did, your weird beliefs will make it so that you're being ostracized by people. If you start talking about like with Mike Pence, if he were to invite us to a dinner party or something, you and I might be a little uncomfortable to do that because we're just like, well, I don't know if I want to, what's going on with that guy? I'll just avoid that whole thing.
Side hug.
Yeah. And with all this internal vigilance that you're constantly participating in, you don't have any time to even scrutinize the cult in general because you're over-focused on something. So the cult keeps you distracted. Whether or not it's on purpose or not, it definitely has that effect to keep power over the cult members. Number two is that it keeps members separate from each other. I've talked about how cults not only separate you from your family and from society, but they also keep you separate between the members. Which is interesting
literally.
because you think cult members, you would want them to be together, but you don't, because then you can't control them as easily.
Yeah.
So you separate them from society and from family. You also separate them from each other, and you also separate them from their mind. Number three is to justify control over the members. So there's a lot of need to punish and control, and of course, many of the individuals, particularly younger people, are going to be having these urges and thoughts that are outside of the rule book, and it gives an excuse to punish, to put them in hard labor camps, or to, if you just are a little upset about the way they're dressing, or you're upset about their choice in a college, instead of going to BYU, they're going to some secular school or something. And you can always find something along these lines, like they looked at pornography or they had an impure thought or something, and then you can come down on them and control them in a variety of ways. And also possibly so the leadership can have the women to themselves. David Koresh of Waco, Texas, the Davidians, I believe.
Yeah, Branch Davidians.
It seems as though, and many other cults like this, he said that the husbands can't have sex with their wives, but David Koresh did have sex with the wives. So, who knows? But IBLP.
It always blows my mind, those kinds of situations, because you'd think if it was just that one, but it happens so frequently. It's like, well, I mean, I don't make the rules. It's look, I don't wanna, but what are we gonna do?
And it happened with IBLP because Bill Gothard was the leader of this movement regarding sexual shame and control, and he was doing these awful things. So you could even see him, who knows, but as a part of this, or an encouragement, a furtherance of this rule of no front hugs, you could literally see Bill Gothard watching a girl, a 17-year-old girl that he has a crush on, hugging one of the boys, and him getting jealous and like instituting this rule. You know what I mean? It wouldn't.
Let me show you how not to hug.
Yeah, that wouldn't be strange, honestly. And we'll get into Bill Gothard's allegations, which are many.
He just didn't think to make rules that let him do enough.
Right. And the last two beliefs within IBLP that I could figure out, because we talked about gender and authority, bigotry and quiverful and sexuality and all this stuff. Number 7 is that the Bible is literal. It's literally the word of God, and it should be followed to the letter. Now, I'm sure if we went line by line in the Bible, and there's some pretty famous lines in the Bible that the vast majority of Christians who say they're following every word in the Bible do not follow. There's certain rules about how you're supposed to dress, or
no shellfish, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, but according to them anyway, the Bible is literal. And then number 8 is that heaven is for rule followers. So this is not a stated rule, but it seems to be the way that they operate.
The 10 Commandments. It starts from, you got to follow that.
Yeah.
Right? So everything's like foundationed on, there are rules. You got to follow. If you don't follow, you're done.
Right. And IBLP has a lot of specific rules about dress and hair for, the women have to have a certain kind of hair, about being pregnant and da-da-da. So I thought about the various different beliefs about within Christianity alone. And, this isn't even talking about other religions. But Berto, what are the various beliefs within Christianity, the different areas of Christianity? What are the different beliefs about how you get into heaven? Like what you need to do while you're on this plane of existence?
Let's see, a couple of variants. The mainstream Catholic view is that you need to, believe in God and accept that you are a sinner and ask for forgiveness in your heart. That's pretty straightforward there. Now, implied, you have to believe in the Holy Trinity and stuff like that. You do. But there's the other aspect, which is more of the evangelical or, some of the other sects that actually no. There's only one important thing. It's you got to accept that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, was our Savior, came down to earth, became man, and saved us on the cross. That's the key, right? And that's very important. There's some that add to that you have to be reborn in a certain specific way, right? And I don't know. I'm sure there's a million other variants.
That's good. Also, you have to be baptized.
Yeah.
A lot
certainly baptized, yes.
A lot of Catholics will say, to the point where they, on the battlefield, you might have a Catholic minister go up to a dying soldier and say, "Are you baptized? Have you been baptized?
Would you have original sin?
Would you like to be baptized?" Right. And they believe that actually put him into heaven.
To your point earlier about how you start by letting the members of your cult know that they're already sinners. So this is ultimate. It's you are born. Yeah. The moment you're a baby, you are in mortal sin.
Yeah, I thought about that. Yeah. I didn't say it, but when we were talking about that, I was like, oh, this is kind of like the original sin. I remember hearing some Catholics, I believe, talking about how we're all born sinners.
Absolutely.
100%. That's why you baptize babies, because I guess the way it was told to me is that we all carry with us the sin of Eve for taking the apple. Right.
We are born of woman. Yeah. If that's not a sin, I don't know what is. Yeah.
So other rules as to how you get into heaven that I have heard about and experienced in the Christian church that I grew up in, what we call the non-denominational Christian church, is that people who live like Jesus, but in the way that it was interpreted by at least some people in my church, was that if you have compassion and altruism for others, if you love others, if you're non-judgmental, the person who is, Jesus did a lot of things in the Bible, if you read the whole thing, and there's a lot of aspects to it. Times when he was angry and he flipped all the taxpayer their tables over or something like that. There are times where he's crying. There are times when he's fasting. There are times when he's compassionate. There are times when he's angry. And the emphasis in my hippie church was that it's all about love, non-judgmentalness, about charity and altruism, and true non-judgmental, meaning that, because there's a line in the Bible that Jesus says where it's something like, why are you worried about the sliver in that person's eye when you have a plank in yours, or something like that. Yeah. And there's another line where Jesus says a rich man can get into heaven
It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man. Yeah,
Right.
and
So-
someone recently I was hearing someone like the translation's not quite right, but I'm sure it's close.
Yeah, the idea that Jesus in general said a lot of things along the lines of, not necessarily that you can't have wealth or something, but that that heaven is for the meek, for the poor, for those who are suffering. Trying to flip it around, I think he was trying to enact social justice because he could see the strata within society.
Communist.
He could see, he could see that the rich and the powerful were oppressing the masses, and he was of the masses and wanted to say, we inherit heaven, and those people, if they don't join us, then they don't get it, because the way that society was, it just seemed like, and even within certain church rules, it was like only the rich and elite would be able to cross the temple to be adorned by the sacrament or whatever to get into heaven. And
I will say that's how I grew up too, like in Colombia, as well as in the church I went to in Lakewood in Tacoma. They were, big emphasis. This was all Catholic, but there was a big emphasis on that. And, I went to a Catholic school in Colombia, and sure, there were nuns, and we got, the little bits of this and that, but there wasn't an obsession with sexuality or weird stuff. There was a lot of talk all the time about doing the right thing, being kind, and then when I came here, the church I went to in Tacoma was great in that sense. And all my youth group, we would talk about all these things, and we would really have a sense of what those messages were and what was valuable about them. So it is sad for me actually to see that there are other sects that go down this other dark path, and that sort of like turn that stuff on its head. Like now all of a sudden, a rich, crazy guy running around in jets, preaching from the pulpit with big Rolexes, that's what we adore. And like sure, you want to make money, that's fine, but let's remember that you were supposed to be like giving to charity and all these things. What happened to that?
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah. And really unfortunate. So, okay. So those are the beliefs of IBLP over this span of 2 chapters that I can summarize. And there's really a lot of other beliefs, really too many to mention, of course, but those are the highlights as far as I saw them. So let's take a break, but the rest of this episode is just going to be for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to hear the rest of this episode, become a patron if you want. Otherwise, everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.
You deserve
wait. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.
I don't know what's wrong with me.